This week's episode of the Wildcard Podcast is brought to you by...
The Boogeyman. I saw him by the mailbox.
It's just the mailman, Ron.
The Boogeyman, scaring children.
Guys, he's here.
Stop
he's
it.
Coming to
You're
get
scaring
us.
Jared.
I'm not scared.
If you don't knock it off, I'm going to send you to bed.
But I saw the Boogeyman.
It looks like the gas canisters have been deployed.
It was probably a squirrel.
It was the Boogeyman.
I swear to God, if you say...
Jeff, did you pull up the drawbridge on the moat?
With what?
He's in the backyard.
What?
I don't know how, but he's right.
My God! Where's the battleaxe?
It's in Drake.
Go get it.
I'll have to dig him up
There's
first.
no time.
Where is he?
I don't know. He's not in security drone camera.
We have the exploding mic.
I pulled the strings. We caught him.
Well, I'll be damned.
Ron, I guess the box trap was a good idea.
Boogeyman loves steak.
I guess we owe you an apology.
Steak.
Right, Ron?
Wait.
Don't
no.
open the... Welcome to the Wildcard Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Eaton, and my co-pilots on this journey to wherever are my good friends Jeff Curtis.
Hello.
And the thing that escaped from New York, the man who assaulted Precinct 13 in the fog on Halloween, the Dark Starman, the Prince of Darkness who lives in the mouth of madness and hails from the village of the damned, Ron Blair.
And I'm not a damn bit ashamed of it.
Yeah, there's 11 references to John Carpenter.
I kept counting to see how many of them you were going to get if you were going
I
to
got
get
the
them
Dark
all.
Star and Starman in one little phrase.
I noticed that.
Yep.
There's no fog in there, is there?
I said
you say
assaulted
the
Precinct 13 in the fog
in the
on
fog.
Halloween.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
So I want to, speaking of Ron Blair, I just want to
Yeah.
give your son some credit here at the top of the episode.
He's great.
Over the last, I don't know about that, but over the
Well,
last
he's
couple,
okay.
on the last couple of weeks, he and Aloria Frazier and Savannah Weber and another young man named Xander Allen have been working with me during Power Hour at school a couple times. Mr. Isaacs wanted to have an assembly on Friday to kind of promote positive culture in our school.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in a time now when, so far I haven't heard of any mass shootings so far in the school year.
Right,
around the
knock
country.
wood.
Of course. There were several last year.
Mm-hmm.
And we have one student who started the school year with us who's no longer at our school because of a threat.
Wow.
They say they were just joking, but you have to take everything like that
You don't
seriously.
joke about that anymore. You don't.
As a kid,
you
you
didn't joke about it then.
As a kid, you don't understand that, though. But like we as
Right.
a school and a school district have to take those things seriously. And we have had a suicide in our school
Yeah?
in this school year.
Wow.
So we wanted to have a positive school culture assembly, and
Right.
Tim found this thing called The Story of Kyle. And it's just a person's narrative of a person they knew when they were a kid who they did a good deed for one day, and it turns out that day the kid was going to kill himself.
Oh, I love that story.
But
Yes.
the other young man reached out to him and kind of like invited him and kind
Yeah.
of helped save his life in a way.
Yeah.
And so what I did is I took Caleb and Aloria and Savannah and Xander, and I broke up the story into paragraphs and gave each of them a paragraph so they were overlapping each other and telling the story, and they spoke in front of 2,000 students. They
Yeah.
were their peers,
Wow.
and they did a
Wow.
really good job, and the kids responded really well to it. So I just wanted to shout him out and Aloria and
No,
Savannah
that's
out.
great. And I'm sure he was honored by it. That's something he feels very strongly about.
Yeah.
It's lovely to see a...
Well, he got the final words too.
Did he?
Yeah, I think after the end of the story, Caleb steps forward, and I kind of adjusted. He basically says, "Never underestimate the power of your actions, or power of your actions." And he says, "With one small gesture." And I had each other kid echo that. They each stepped forward in line with him and said,
Nice.
"With one small gesture, one small gesture, one small
Cool.
gesture,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can save a person's life or change a person's life." And so,
I'm really impressed with him lately. And both of my kids have been conscientious of social issues.
Yeah.
And they both feel very strongly about them. So I'm very proud. And good for Tim, who
Yep.
And he did
always
an
goes out of
excellent
his
job.
way. He always goes out of his way to make sure that there is a good environment for these kids to learn. Central is the best high school.
Excellent
it's the best
job
high school.
with that assembly too. He was very, very honest, very open, but also very encouraging to the kids.
Yeah. I love how Tim runs that school.
So Caleb did a great job. Speaking of Blair's doing great jobs, Ron always does an excellent job telling us what this podcast is all about.
This podcast is about studying fractals and inconsistencies existing in greater units being isolated to smaller units in the hopes that with atomic coercion, the inconsistencies will eventually return to order with a new set of rules manipulated into a new state of behaviors by the wildcards.
And that's why we started this podcast.
That's exactly why we
I
started.
remember us talking about
Fractals.
Yeah, fractals.
Fractal inconsistencies, behaviors of
Atomic freedom.
Atomic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was our first conversation at Cheddar's.
Yeah.
At Cheddar's while we were eating and drinking. We were saying, What about fractals?
Yeah.
We dabble in atomic physics from time to time. It's a hobby.
And, the thing is, we probably don't even need to say it because the audience keeps up.
They would assume
the deckheads know these things.
Right, they would assume that we're
There are more things in my studio than just a microphone.
Absolutely.
64 episodes in, if they don't know this is about fractals.
Absolutely. We have star
We
charts
failed
and
them.
all kinds of stuff going on there.
Right.
We like to look at models of the
But
universe
occasionally,
and fuck with
in addition to fractals,
them. Right.
we like to talk about ourselves.
Right.
And so
Most of all.
we have our favorite section.
Right.
And this week's favorite question is, what is your favorite conference at which Jeff has spoken in the past 2 weeks?
I think it would be the conference that Jeff spoke at last week.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
I had another one in mind, but we'll go with that one.
Okay.
The theater writers and filmmakers conference that was in Lexington. Oh, it's
let's
fabulous.
talk about
And
that.
Jeff just didn't attend it. Okay, he was asked to do a workshop.
speaker.
You make us proud.
I was one of the speakers at this conference. I spoke on producing and directing a workshop of your own show because of course
Heroicus, right.
I did it twice last year in Heroicus, even though I don't consider myself either a director or a producer.
But you've done both.
But I've done both.
Speaking of things we talked about at Cheddar's that same day.
Right.
That was also something we talked about at Cheddar's on that day.
But it was a fabulous conference. It was lightly attended, unfortunately, but everybody there knew what they were talking about. It was probably had more film connections than it did, people speaking for more film than theater, because Lexington has a big film community.
Oh, yeah. I used to work in that community.
And I met a number of people and a couple guys from Wrigley Media who do a lot of unscripted television. I had a nice conversations with them, and their doors are open for us to, for ideas, and they asked me to send them some music samples, and so I was very excited with the connections I was meeting. It was a fabulous conference. I learned things that I didn't know that I even wanted to know.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And it was great. It was great for making connections.
No, that's fantastic. And
what an honor to get to speak at a conference.
Yeah.
like that,
no
too.
kidding. I wish organizations like that would reach out and let more people know. I had never heard of this.
Well, it was the first conference that they did. So this was the maiden conference of it. So you wouldn't have heard about it unless you were invited to it. Or
Gotcha.
I mean, it was I put the link on my Facebook page, but I wasn't actively promoting it because I'd never been to it before either. I didn't know how it was going to turn out. It was sponsored by this theater. I forget the name of the group, but there's this theater writing group, and it's more of like guys getting together to talk about their own stuff and to support group. And so they decided to put on this conference. And it was Bill McCann is the person who was really the lead of putting this whole thing together, and he did this amazing job. And I didn't realize until it said film in the title of the conference. I didn't realize how much film was going to be a part of it until I went to it. And there's it was lots of Dramatist Guild people there too. But it was but I didn't realize, like in Kentucky there were 40 films filmed in Kentucky last year.
Yeah.
People come to Kentucky because of the tax credits and other incentives to make movies here, and they're more limited by the lack of equipment and people that they can hire here than anything else. They haven't met us yet. There's a great need in Kentucky for more camera operators, more cameras, more grip operators, more of the tech people. If you're a tech person wanting to do movies, you could work probably all the time in Kentucky because there's not enough of those tech kind of people in the state.
You certainly could.
I feel like colleges should get in touch with this group and
they really should.
Well, there's actually one of the speakers at the conference was the director of the Arts Council or the television. It was the Film and Tourism Board or Council for the state. And he was talking, and they've actually on their website, they've got a link for connecting filmmakers to people in the state that put down their services on this website. You can list, okay, I've got a green room, or I've got a studio, or I've got camera, or I'm able to do grips, and you can put your resume there. And, so if you're someone who has the equipment or has the know-how to do it, you can get yourself listed and then start working.
Yeah.
These were things I didn't know. I'm not someone who's really explored a whole lot of the film community, especially in Kentucky. So I was learning all kinds of things about that were just blew my mind. And the fact that, these two guys I met, Danny and Ross, they've made probably hundreds, if not thousands, of episodes of unscripted television, like Home and Garden and Travel Network, and all of these kinds of shows. And the fact that people like them were in the state doing that, and you can, I guess it doesn't matter where you're actually headquartered because you're doing that all over the country. You have people everywhere. Traveling around, and the fact that they were so nice and they were so open to meeting and talking with other people, and their doors are open for ideas. It just fucking blew my mind.
Yeah. I feel like the Kentucky Film Commission, who I've dealt with them for many years on various projects and getting help from them from time to time. Like in the Pittsburgh area, I had a friend who had worked with George Romero several times. Yes. And what they do, and I think Louisville, Lexington, somewhere should do this, E-Town, is you have a union grip house so that if a film comes in, they contact the grip house, says we need such and such many grips, we need such and such many gaffers, cam operators, all this stuff, all the technical stuff, dolly, grips, and they would hire specifically out of this one house. So my buddy got to work on like Striking Distance, and I don't think he did the M Night, but that's Philadelphia. But anyway, it's this. If you're shooting in Pittsburgh, you call this house, you say, this is what I need. Those people loan them out, and that's a... I don't know how involved the union is in running the grip house or the organization of it, but either way...
Well, in the film and music and theater, a lot of it is connections more so than anything else. My question is always, how do you break into this? Well, you break in by knowing somebody. Well, how do you know somebody? Well, by breaking in and doing something. You have to meet them. And so it's really a networking kind of game, because these kinds of jobs aren't posted in the papers for job hiring. No. So you have to be part of these communities where these jobs are made known. And so being part of the union, such as in Pittsburgh, they would make these jobs known, even if they aren't actually doing anything else about connecting people to doing this stuff. Go ahead.
What I totally forgot.
Well, it reminds me of when I was in college. We would have posted all over the walls internships with various places around the country. Right. You have a place where people can go to find access to these opportunities.
I remember what I was going to say. Almost every film acting job that I had gotten from being on the set, and another filmmaker saying, I'm doing this project, I would love for you to do it.
Right.
So every project I did led to another, to another, to another, to another.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is get on one.
I've gotten
one set, work hard, do your
and impress
best.
people.
And impress people. Yes.
You guys, I'm sure, have seen at least one of my stupid commercials.
Yeah,
I've seen all 5 of them. I love them.
Well, the thing is, it's like the only reason I got to do this is because I was visiting churches when I came to the area, and I went to one a couple times, and there was a guy who was there, and like we got to talking one day. And then I stopped going to that church. Yeah. And I think he actually stopped going to that church as well. And he just messaged me on Facebook because we had a conversation. Sometimes it's just something dumb look like that.
Yeah. Bart has thrown a few people my way. It never amounted to anything, but that he threw them my way was very appreciative. Oh, yeah.
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 Because people contact him and he'll post things on Facebook about whatever is... I remember there was one like a year ago. I don't think it panned out, but it was about the mill.
Oh, the silo.
Yeah, the silo.
Which it's a good group of guys. They ended up filming somewhere other than Hodgenville.
Yeah.
And it was right around vacation. I was going to audition for it, but I couldn't get the amount of days off to do both the film and vacation. I'd already paid for the vacation. Yeah. But anytime Bart hears film, he'll refer them to me so that I can refer them to the correct place.
Yeah, and one of the speakers at this conference was one of the... I forget his name, Jesse, I think something. He's one of the writers on
Ventura.
Jessica Jones
on
Netflix.
And
another one of the speakers was Charles Edward Pogue, who was one of... He wrote the first draft of the screenplay for The Fly before Cronenberg came in.
And messed with it, right.
But so he still got co-writing credit for that. He's also wrote Dragonfly and a whole bunch of other things for Hollywood. And he's moved back and he's focusing on playwriting. But just the quality of people and just the be able to go, be talking with people and just the intimacy of being able to, just.
It's a cool environment.
Yeah, it was a
that's
great
how we
environment.
learn. That's
I'm
how
really
we
glad
learn
you
to
got
tell
that
stories,
opportunity.
by listening to these other guys who have been there and done that, and we learn from their gathered experiences.
Speaking of learning from experiences of other people,
Yeah,
it's my turn to do an episode.
outstanding.
So my first question for you guys as we get into the topic is, do you like puzzles?
I love puzzles.
What kind of puzzles?
That's what I'm asking you.
Give me a puzzle.
What kind
I
of
love it.
puzzles
I
do you
don't
guys
like
like?
Sudoku. There you go. That's
Okay,
the
see,
one I don't
I
like.
did those in college.
And
a bit.
CryptoQuips I don't care for.
That's my
'Cause they're so
favorite.
damn hard.
That's my
I don't have the
I
patience.
enjoy Sudoku. I don't like puzzles with puzzle pieces
Jigsaw
that you do.
puzzles.
Jigsaw
I love
puzzles.
them.
I hate
God,
jigsaw
I love them
puzzles.
so much.
Now, where do you think that came from? That love for them came from?
From my in the episode about me, I had mentioned that my dad, the algebra teacher,
Yeah.
came home with different kinds of puzzles, and I would get praised for being how quickly I could do
Yeah.
them, how quickly I could figure them out.
That episode was called "The Wild Cards Talk Treasure," by the way.
Thank you. If you want to check it out, it was episode from and
Yep, and so
and
there
it
you
was
go.
excellent. Yeah.
I had a grandfather who did a lot of crossword puzzles and the jumble.
Yeah.
And so whenever I was at his house when I was a little kid,
Yeah.
he'd be working, and I'd be, the little kid who's like looking over his shoulder trying to help
Sure.
out. Obviously, he didn't need my help.
Right.
But he would always make me feel like I was contributing, whether it's jigsaw puzzles, crossword puzzles, or that. And then in college, I did a lot of puzzles because I remember specifically, I think I've told this story before. We had a botany class my freshman year, second semester. And it was right after lunch. So I'd eaten, I was full, I was tired. I don't care about plants. I'm an animal person, not a plant person.
Right.
And the professor was 130 years old. And he used the old clicky slides and the little rotating slides, and there was pictures. And I just could not, I could barely stay awake. So the only way I could stay awake was to not pay attention and do puzzles.
Yeah.
But at least I was there.
Right,
So
right.
I would do the Sudokus, and Cryptoquip was my favorite.
Yeah, those are tough.
They are, once you get started on them, they get easier. Like once you understand the patterns, things to be looking for.
Yeah.
The Cryptoquip, for those who aren't familiar, it's just usually like a sentence or two, and every letter has been substituted for a different letter.
Right.
So in this puzzle, T represents M, and sometimes they'll give you one to get started with, like just so you know, X is A. So you go through every X and you write the letter A above it, and you start piecing together, starting usually with small words. Like if it's a 3-letter word, it starts with A, it's probably
And.
Right.
and.
Right.
So now you know N and D, and you can start going through like that. And I used to do those every day.
Do you know who created those?
I have
Or
no
something
clue.
similar? Stephen Sondheim.
Interesting.
Did he create those? I know that he used to do the crossword puzzle for the New York Times. He would come up with
I
that
didn't
every
know
week.
that.
I'm almost certain he created
I've always loved that guy
CryptoQuips.
already.
I'm not 100%, but
He might have.
he created some kind of word puzzle that we now use on a regular basis. CryptoQuips is, I seriously think that may have been it.
Oh, it could be. I don't know.
Well, a cryptogram is just a sentence where there's been a substitution. Cryptoquip is usually a quote from someone.
Yeah.
All right, second question. Did you ever have a secret code with anyone when you were younger? Like a way of communicating with someone that maybe other people wouldn't have understood? The answer can be no. That's okay.
I don't remember. My wife and I have a secret code for if one of us should ever get kidnapped.
Oh,
Wow.
there you go.
I'm not telling you what it is.
Fine,
you
I don't
shouldn't.
care, 'cause then we'll start kidnapping everybody.
Right. We'll go all over
And
the
I
place.
didn't either, but my prom date, my senior year, she and her stepbrother had a way of communicating by adding syllables in weird places.
Oh, that
of
makes
words,
sense, though.
So that if you knew what syllables to ignore, the words were there.
Yeah.
But if you didn't, it just sounded like gibberish. And so when I asked her to prom, I asked her in that language because I heard her and him doing it once, and so I kind of figured it out and used that language to ask her to go to prom with me.
Did she turn you down in that language?
No, she accepted.
People who
What happened at that prom is another story for another time. But,
people who buy drugs often have
a system.
an agreed upon language of coding that one thing represents another. I'm not going to give you examples,
Oh, okay.
just in case you intercept one of my emails.
You guys are
or
all telling
texts.
secrets. We're all getting secrets.
Right.
So let's go and think meta about our podcast.
Okay.
What are some of the things we talk about the most on this podcast?
Conspiracy theories.
Okay.
Food.
Nazis.
Okay. Nazis. So we're talking
Nazis.
Nazis.
We talk about Nazis
So-
a lot. Oh, is this the cracking?
So we're gonna. So the question number 3 is: who are some of the most famous code breakers of all time?
I can't remember his name, but there's a movie with Benedict Cumberbatch
Yes, there
about
is.
him. Yes.
It's called The Imitation
The
Game.
Imitation Game, yeah.
And it's
great.
about Alan Turing.
Alan. Is that who we're talking
That's
about
who
today?
we're starting with today.
Oh, what a tragic story this guy
yeah.
has.
Alan
It's a great
Alan
story,
Matheson
though.
Turing was born June 23rd, 1912, and he was an English computer scientist, mathematician, logician, crypt-analyst,
Yeah.
philosopher, and theoretical biologist. He was highly influential in the development of theoretical computer science, providing a formalization of the concepts of algorithms and computations with what was called the Turing machine.
He fought the man so hard.
Which we're going to get to that later. No spoilers there yet.
Oh, sorry. God, his story is fantastic.
But essentially, this Turing machine that he came up with, that he theorized and developed, can be considered a model of a general-purpose computer. Wow. Pretty much every computer that we have now was, I don't want to say initially conceived by him, but they were being conceived of by a lot of people, but his were the most practical designs for how these things
his work was the most influential.
He is widely considered to be the father of theoretical computer science and artificial intelligence.
Wow.
Yeah, Turing was bad.
Alan Turing was born in Maida Vale, London, while his father, Julius Matheson Turing, was on leave from his position with the Indian Civil Service at Chhatrapur, which is a province in India. No? You're making it French somehow. Very early in life, Turing showed signs of the genius. Turing showed signs of the genius that he was later to display prominently. His parents enrolled him at St. Michael's, a day school at a place called, I love this name, St. Leonard's-on-Sea.
I taught there.
6. Oh, yeah. You taught Turing there while you were in college.
Right, I taught him French.
Yeah. The headmistress at St. Leonard's-on-Sea recognized his talent early on, as did many of his subsequent teachers. Between January 22nd and January 1922, not January 22nd, January 1922 and 1926, Turing was educated at Hazelhurst Preparatory School, an independent school in the village of Frant.
Frant?
No, Frant. In Sussex.
F-R-A-N-T?
Could the city council not do something about the name Frant?
That's so great. It's in Sussex, now East Sussex.
Suffolk.
Yeah.
We're so proud of the name Frant. We're not going to change it. We shan't.
I grew up in France.
I grew up in
You shan't
France.
change Frant?
I shan't change Frant.
In
It's a lovely name.
1926, at the age of 13...
I went for a run and now I'm panting in France.
I'm franting and franting and frant.
He went on to Sherborne School, a boarding
Sherborne.
independent school in the market town of Sherborne in Dorset. The first day of term coincided with the 1926 general strike in Britain, but Turing was so determined to attend that he rode his bicycle unaccompanied 60 miles from Southampton to Sherborne,
Wow.
stopping overnight at an inn. That's how badly he wanted to go to school. Because the strike was on, the trains and things weren't running, so he took it upon himself to get where he needed to go.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. And we'll get back to his athleticism later. You know, he's a super nerd.
Yeah.
If you watch Imitation Game, he is almost Asperger's level.
I was going to ask you.
There have been some theories that he might have been borderline.
He had a personality disorder for sure,
Without a
I'm
doubt.
thinking.
Turing's natural inclination towards mathematics and science did not earn him respect from some of the teachers at Sherborne, whose definition of education placed more emphasis on the classics. His headmaster wrote to his parents, this is a direct quote, "I hope he will not fall between two stools. If he is to stay at public school, he must aim at becoming educated. If he is to be solely a scientific specialist, he is wasting his time at a public school."
What? Wow, that says a lot about that public school.
Yeah.
I know you dislike this movie, but Pink Floyd's The Wall does it best.
They don't need no education.
Seriously, when the kids are being shoved into the meat grinder off the production line,
Yes.
that's the school system right there.
Yes, I understood
good
the
thing
metaphor when I watched the movie.
When I
things
hated
have
what,
changed.
right before I turned the movie off, I saw that scene.
I watched the entire movie. I've seen the entire movie to make my judgment of the fact that I think it sucks as a movie. As a music video, it's fine. But as a movie, no.
Hey,
I feel like
Jeff,
we've had this conversation.
tear down the wall.
All right.
Tear down the wall.
Despite this letter to his parents, Turing continued to show remarkable ability in the studies he loved, solving advanced mathematical problems in 1927.
Sorry.
It's okay. I'm going to say he's 15 years old. He's solving advanced problems without having even studied elementary calculus. So he has no calculus education. He's still solving problems. Like, he's figuring it out on his own.
Right.
In 1928, aged 16, he encountered Albert Einstein's work. And not only did he grasp it, but it seems he was able to understand some concepts that were kind of hidden in Einstein's writings that many adults and physicists didn't grasp.
And this was a time where Einstein was still active in the scientific community, wasn't it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
1928, yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. That was his heyday, really.
Yep.
At Sherborne, Turing formed a significant friendship with fellow pupil Christopher Morcom. Their relationship provided inspiration in Turing's future endeavors, but it was cut short by Morecambe's death. In February 1930, his death in February 1930 from complications of bovine tuberculosis, which Morecambe contracted after drinking infected cow's milk some years previously.
Yeah, if I had a nickel.
Or every time you
would
died
you
from
do?
Every time
bovine-
What would you do with it?
I'd probably invest
Buy
it.
some milk.
Buy some milk.
Hopefully not infected with
Right.
bovine tuberculosis. This event, the death of this close friend,
Couldn't they see the cows coughing before
The
they
cow's
blood-
obviously
blood in the
having a
milk?
problem.
Yeah.
The cow's acting like Doc Holliday out there.
The event caused Turing great sorrow. He coped with his grief by working that much harder on the topics of science and mathematics that he had shared with Morecambe. This is a letter that he wrote to Morecambe's mother. It's a quote from that letter. So Turing wrote this when he was 16 years old. I am sure I could not have found anywhere another companion so brilliant and yet so charming and unconceited. I regarded my interest in my work, and in such things as astronomy, to which he introduced me, as something to be shared with him, and I think he felt a little the same about me. I know I must put as much energy, if not as much interest into my work, as if he were alive, because that is what he would like me to do. A 16-year-old wrote that.
That's lovely.
Some have speculated that Morecambe's death was the cause of Turing's atheism and materialism. It seems that, at this point in his life, he still believed in such concepts as a spirit, independent of the body, and surviving death.
That surprises me, though, for somebody as analytical as he is,
Well,
as
the way
pragmatic.
you're raised often.
Yeah.
In another letter, also written to Morecambe's mother, Turing said, personally, I believe that spirit is really eternally connected with matter, but certainly not by the same kind of body. As regards the actual connection between spirit and body, I consider that the body can hold on to a spirit whilst the body is alive, and awake the two are firmly connected. When the body is asleep, I cannot guess what happens, but when the body dies, the mechanism of the body holding the spirit is gone, and the spirit finds a new body sooner or later, perhaps immediately.
Huh.
Reincarnation.
Yeah.
That's
essentially.
advanced thinking for someone
16-year-old
of that.
who
that
also
age,
is
yeah.
a math and science focus, not really a
Right.
philosopher.
And this is not, it's not spread wide. These theories are not spread wide, this line of thinking,
Yeah.
the way it is now. back
Well, he
then.
was from France.
He was
from France,
he
and they
wasn't
were
from
very
France.
advanced.
He was from Maida Vale. He went to school in France. when he
They're
was
very advanced in Fright and Mattavale.
young. Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I said. So I'm going to kind of quickly go through the next section of his life because he studied under a lot of people, studied a lot of really complicated math that
Right.
I could not understand if I...
No, there's no way to fathom what he did. Like
But
a
I'll-
normal person can't fathom.
And I consider myself to be
His
fairly intelligent. And I was good at math when I was a kid, but I haven't continued to study it. So, ugh. But after Sherborne, Turing studied as an undergraduate from 1931 to 1934, 3 years, at King's College,
course.
Cambridge, where he was awarded first-class honors in mathematics. In 1935, at the age of 22, he was elected a Fellow of King's on the strength of a dissertation in which he proved what's called the central limit theorem, which is like a probability statistics
Yeah.
analytical tool. In 1936, Turing published his paper on computable numbers with an application to the Entscheidungsproblem.
Entscheidungsproblem?
Entscheidungsproblem. It's a German word.
Again, if I had a nickel for
Every Entscheidungsproblem you had to
every
solve.
Entscheidens problem,
In this paper, this
I'd
is,
be penniless.
I would have 10 cents.
You'd be
so this is a
penniless.
direct,
Right.
This quote here is a direct from Wikipedia.
Okay.
In this paper, Turing reformulated Kurt Gödel's, what's the another two dots?
Gödel's.
Gödel's? Kurt Gödel's 1931 results on the limits of proof and computation, replacing Gödel's universal arithmetic-based formal language with the formal and simple hypothetical devices that became known as Turing machines. Essentially, Turing showed that highly complex mathematical problems could be solved using machines that can compute solutions. So
This was prior to the government approaching him.
absolutely.
Like, I wasn't aware of
No,
that.
he's in school. He's just in college.
I wasn't aware he made a machine before
This is
then.
pre-computers, pre-calculator.
Yeah, essentially he's saying, here's
it's like
some
the
really
30s.
here's some really complex, it's mid-30s. Here's some really complex math that we can solve with our hands, but I've devised a way of thinking by which we can make machines do this math for us, essentially is what he's saying. From September 1936 to July 1938, Turing spent most of his time studying under a guy named Alonzo Church, who was also kind of coming at these same theories, but was much, much older than Turing, at Princeton University. His second year as a Jane Eliza Proctor visiting fellow, so he came over to the United States to do some studying.
Yeah.
In addition to his purely mathematical work, he studied cryptology. In June 1938, he obtained his PhD from the Department of Mathematics at Princeton. His dissertation, Systems of Logic Based on Ordinals.
What's an ordinal?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's like a fractal, but prettier.
Yeah, that's
It's more
not
embellished.
even a little bit like that.
Yeah.
It introduced the concept of ordinal logic and the notion of relative computing, where Turing machines are augmented with what are called so-called oracles, allowing the study of problems that cannot be solved by Turing machines. Essentially, he's saying, I built this machine that can solve math, but if you do this, it's going to be able to solve even more complicated problems.
Like systems.
Essentially.
Yeah.
John von Neumann wanted to hire him as his postdoctoral assistant, but Turing went back to England.
Should we mention that I had no idea what this podcast was about when I told people what the podcast was about?
Yep.
It just fell into place that way. So how interesting.
That it's about complex mathematics.
Well, we have a telepathy.
That's what it is.
Yeah. That must be it.
Yeah, that's the ticket.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
That's the
around this
ticket.
time, the late 1930s, there's a pretty major event taking place in Europe.
I don't know what it could have been.
What would be on the rise in Europe in the mid-30s?
Only there's
Discotheques.
No,
Discotheques
it
were
starts
on
with
the
an
rise.
F.
Friendship.
Frant.
Friendship, Frant.
Yeah. Turing began...
Fascism!
That's it.
Fascism!
Oh, of course.
What does fascism lead to? It starts with an N.
Nationalism.
Yeah, and
Nazis.
Nazis!
Oh, those
That's
guys.
it!
Nazis, guys, it's Nazis again.
Nazis!
Turing began working at Bletchley
We're
Park.
back to Nazis.
Always.
We always come back to
Yay!
Nazis.
It always comes to Nazis.
Britain's secret headquarters for its Codebreakers during World War II in 1939. By one estimate, Turing's work at Bletchley Park may have cut short the war by up to 2 years.
Wow.
He is credited with saving millions of lives.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. He's breaking
We're getting there in a
communications.
second, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're good.
Sorry, I keep jumping ahead. The movie,
Well, the movie is
the big chunk
fantastic.
of that movie is
I mean,
him and his team
85%
figuring out that. Yeah, that's the majority
is
of
this
the
work
film.
at Bletchley Park.
Which is the movie was great, but it truncates his personal
It
story
does.
after the machine,
Well, it's
which is
because it's mostly
horrifying.
about that more so
Right,
Well,
than
and
right.
it's,
Him
in
figuring
some
that
ways,
out.
it's about his suppression of his personal life.
oh yeah, well she had to.
Right.
He had to suppress it.
Turing immediately got to work designing a code-breaking machine called the Bomb, an update of a previous Polish machine with the help of his colleague Gordon Welchman. The Bomb shortened the steps required in decoding, and 200 of them were built for British use over the course of the war. They allowed codebreakers to decipher up to 4,000 messages a day. So he's already taking his machines and making them
Right.
so they can solve this, the crypto-analysis
Now,
problem.
was this without any? Was this before the British had captured an Enigma machine from the Germans? Because they
It's about the
Well,
same
it was
time.
the same
Oh,
time.
yeah, that's literally... yeah.
His Turing was his job, from what I understand, was to figure out the
Enigma
machine.
Okay,
And
so
to
they
crack
had
the
it.
Enigma
So they,
machine.
but they still had to
My
crack out.
very
the-
next
Right.
sentence is
Okay.
his greatest achievement was cracking the Enigma,
Yeah. Oh,
a
there we
mechanical
go.
device
Yeah, that's why-
used by the German army to encode secure messages.
I believe that's why he was hired, because they had found the machine and they said, we can't figure it out. None of our mathematicians can figure this out.
Well, to be honest, they weren't using many mathematicians. Most of the people they had there were just cryptologists who were used to working with secret messages.
And that's the
But you
problem.
need a cipher, and
Yeah.
the Germans changed theirs every day.
Right,
So
right.
he had to come up with a way, mathematically, to cycle through all these different options to
Yeah.
get what this code was each day.
So he had to crack an entire system
Yeah.
instead of
Right.
just...
He had to build something that,
Message
at the
by
beginning of the
message.
day, could figure out what the new cipher was,
Right.
so they could continue decoding messages.
Yeah.
It proved nearly impossible to decrypt without the correct cipher, which the German forces changed every day.
Right.
Turing worked to decipher German naval communications at a point where German U-boats were sinking ships carrying vital supplies across the Atlantic between Allied nations. Early on, Bletchley Park's operations were hampered by a lack of resources, but pleas for better staffing were ignored by government officials. So, Alan Turing and some of his other codebreakers went over their superiors' heads and wrote directly to Prime Minister Winston Churchill.
Wow.
Wasn't well received by
By his superiors.
by
though.
his superiors.
But it was
No.
well received by someone else.
As going over
Oh, yeah.
superiors' heads usually isn't.
One-
Yeah.
One of the
yeah, but they gave no
Codebreakers
choice. They
From
said
Bletchley
do this
Park
and gave him no resources.
delivered the letter by hand to Churchill in October 1941. And here's part of what it said. Our reason for writing to you is that for months we have done everything that we possibly can through the normal channels, and that we despair of any early improvement without your intervention. These aren't going to get better if you don't help us. No doubt in the long run, these particular requirements will be met, but meanwhile, still more precious months will have been wasted, and as our needs are continually expanding, we see little hope of ever being adequately staffed, they wrote to Churchill. In response, Churchill immediately fired off a missive to his chief of staff. Make sure they have all they want on extreme priority and report to me this has been done.
I love Churchill.
It's a great moment in the movie.
Well, the whole bureaucracy. These governments are bureaucratic, but when you're fighting a war, you can't wait for this red tape to go through, these approvals and all that. People are dying every day, and they treat it like an office.
Yeah.
Like it's a standard job. It isn't. They got to get on this stuff.
Though Turing's work was incredibly effective, his colleagues were off-put by some of his stranger tendencies. Like many geniuses.
That's my favorite meat, is geniusin. Geniusin steaks.
Yeah. Turing was not without his eccentricities. In the first week of June each year, he would get a bad attack of hay fever, and he would cycle to the office wearing a service gas mask to keep his pollen out of his face.
I'm sure it's unnerving to see.
Yeah. His bicycle that he rode had a fault. The chain would come off at regular intervals. Instead of having it mended, he would count the number of times the pedals went round and would get off the bicycle in time to adjust the chain by hand.
What? I guess it gives him something to think about while he's...
That's probably
like
focusing.
Another of his eccentricities is that he chained his tea mug to the radiator pipes to prevent it being stolen.
Wow.
He's an interesting fellow.
Definitely.
Yeah.
While working at Bletchley, Turing, who was a talented long-distance runner, we talked about his biking earlier, occasionally ran the 40 miles to London when he was needed for meetings.
Jesus Christ, 40
Well,
miles.
how fast? Well,
and he was capable.
How immediate is he required to be at these meetings?
And he was capable of world-class marathon standards. Turing tried out for the 1948 British Olympic team, but hampered by an injury, so he's hurt.
Yeah.
His tryout time for the marathon was only 11 minutes slower than British silver medalist
Holy
Thomas
shit.
Richards' Olympic race time of 2 hours and 35 minutes.
Wow.
So he ran a marathon in 2 hours and 45 minutes.
That's 26 miles.
Hurt. He did hurt.
My God.
He was Walton Athletics Club's best runner, a fact discovered when he passed the group while running alone. In 1941, Turing and his team managed to decode the German Enigma messages, helping to steer Allied ships away from the German submarine attacks. In 1942, he traveled to the U.S. to help the Americans with their own code-breaking work. And there's some interesting quotes I didn't take down while he's kind of making fun of the Americans' work.
Right.
During this trip, he also assisted at Bell Labs with the development of secure speech devices, like voice masking.
Oh,
He helped invent voice masking technology.
That.
He returned to Bletchley Park in March 1943. During his absence, Hugh Alexander, he was also in the movie, he's played by the guy who played Ozymandias in Watchmen, the movie. I forget the actor's name.
Oh, I can't remember.
Hugh Alexander had officially assumed the position of head of Hut 8, the area which he was working at Bletchley Park.
Yeah.
Although Alexander had been the de facto head for some time, because Turing had little interest in the day-to-day running of the section. Turing became a general consultant for crypt-analysis at Bletchley Park. Here's what Hugh Alexander wrote of Turing's contribution. There should be no question in anyone's mind that Turing's work was the biggest factor in Hut 8's success. In the early days, he was the only cryptographer who thought the problem worth tackling, and not only was he primarily responsible for the main theoretical work within the Hut, but he also shared with Welchman and Keene the chief credit for the invention of the bomb. It is always difficult to say that anyone is absolutely indispensable, but if anyone was dispensable to Hut 8, it was Turing. The pioneer's work always tends to be forgotten when experience and routine later make everything seem easy, and many of us in Hut 8 felt that the magnitude of Turing's contribution was never fully realized by the outside world.
Wow.
It was Matthew
something. Good? I got it.
Yeah.
In 1946, Turing was appointed an officer of the Order of the British Empire by King George VI for his wartime services, but his work remained secret for many years. Between 1945 and 1947, Turing lived in Hampton, London, while he worked on the design of the ACE, Automatic Computing Engine, at the National Physical Laboratory. He presented a paper on February 19, 1946, which was the first detailed design of a stored program computer.
So that was the birth right there.
Turing was appointed reader in the mathematics department at the Victoria University of Manchester in 1948 and in 1949. And in 1949, he became the deputy director of the Computing Machine Laboratory there at Victoria University, working on software for one of the earliest stored program computers, the Manchester Mark I. During this time, he continued to do more abstract work in mathematics and in computing machinery and intelligence. Turing addressed the problem of artificial intelligence and proposed an experiment that became known as the Turing test, an attempt to define a standard for a machine to be called intelligent. The idea was that a computer could be said to think if a human interrogator could not tell it apart through conversation from a human being. So if you were talking to someone on a computer, could you tell if it was a computer or a person? If they could trick you into believing they were a person, then the computer was thinking. In the paper, Turing suggested that rather than building a program to simulate the adult mind, it would be better rather to produce a simpler one to simulate a child's mind, and then to subject it to a course of education, to teach it.
Yeah.
A reversed form of the Turing test is widely used on the internet. The CAPTCHA test is intended to determine whether the user is a human or a computer. That you have to type in those letters or
find the road sign. Those are my favorites. I don't like typing in the letters. I can't see them.
They make it so difficult.
Yeah.
The test was introduced by Turing in his 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. It opens with the words, "I propose to consider the question, can machines think?" Because thinking is difficult to define, Turing chooses to replace the question by another, which is closely related to it, and is expressed in relatively unambiguous words. Turing's new question is, are there imaginable digital computers which would do well in the imitation game? This question, Turing believed, is one that can actually be answered. In the remainder of the paper, he argued against all major objections to the proposition that machines can think.
It just occurred to me why that movie was called The Imitation Game from that sentence. It's the imitation of the computer imitating a human being, not Turing hiding his...
That's a part of it, though.
That is part of it.
A part of it.
But that's what I thought was the reason for the title of the movie.
I think it's
it's a double meaning. I wasn't aware there was a
layered.
double meaning as well,
So what do you guys think? Can computers think?
No.
No, they can be programmed to behave in a particular way, but they're not sentient.
What about learning? Is learning different?
Well, they've built the Watson computer, and it does learn, but they had to write so much code using all these variables for it to be able to learn from past mistakes and learn to solve problems. And because until Watson, no computer could actually win Jeopardy. Humans would always win that because they get the nuance of the question, and the computer
It's data.
It's just data. And with Watson, they were able to cross that boundary of the computer being able to process it more like a human being. But that doesn't mean that Watson is thinking.
No.
One thing I kind of left out of this because of time consideration was that Turing actually built a program that would play chess. Like a computer, he built the first computer that played chess, and it didn't win a ton, but it could play the game, which is not an easy game to learn how to play, even for humans.
Boy, they advanced that technology of the chess game, didn't they? Because I'll concede to that thinking. Like, I know it's programmed to behave a certain way.
It knows all these. It responds. It has all these moves, and it knows that this move you counter with this move. That you counter with this move.
Now, one thing we've been avoiding so far the entire episode is his personal life.
I didn't want to bring it up because I figured you were saving it for spoilers.
Because I didn't want anyone who would be affected by it to let it diminish what he's done.
No, it's important to know what he did first.
In 1941, Turing proposed marriage to Hut 8 colleague Joan Clark, played by Keira Knightley in the movie. A fellow mathematician and crypt-analyst, but their engagement was short-lived. After admitting his homosexuality to his fiancée, who was reportedly unfazed by the revelation, Turing decided that he could not go through with the marriage. In January 1952, Turing, then 39, started a relationship with Arnold Murray, a 19-year-old unemployed man. Turing had met Murray just before Christmas outside the Regal Cinema when walking down to Manchester's Oxford Road and invited him to lunch. On January 23rd, that same month, Turing's house was burgled.
Yeah, that's Mackenzie's birthday. Yeah. Well, not that year.
Murray told Turing that the burglar was an acquaintance of his, and Turing reported the crime to the police. During the investigation, he acknowledged a sexual relationship with Murray. At this time, homosexual acts were criminal offenses in the United Kingdom, and both men were charged with gross indecency under Section 11 of the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885. Initial committal proceedings for the trial were held on February 27th, during which Turing's solicitor reserved his defense, which means he did not argue or provide evidence against the allegations. Later, convinced by the advice of his brother, who actually was his solicitor, Turing entered a plea of guilty. The case, Regina v. Turing and Murray, was brought to trial on March 31st, 1952. Turing was convicted and given a choice between imprisonment and probation, which would be conditional on his agreement to undergo hormonal treatment designed to reduce libido.
Gosh, horrible. Yeah.
He accepted,
Awful.
it's chemical castration.
Right.
He accepted the option of treatment via injections of what was then called stilbestrol, now called diethylstilbestrol, or DES, a synthetic estrogen. This treatment was continued for the course of 1 year. The treatment rendered Turing impotent and caused a condition called gynecomastia, essentially a growth of male breast tissue, due to hormonal changes, fulfilling in the literal sense Turing's prediction that, no doubt I shall emerge from it all a different man, but quite who I've not found out. Murray was given a conditional discharge. Turing's conviction led to the removal of his security clearance and barred him from continuing...
Just for being gay.
Yep. It's illegal.
So goddamn stupid.
And barred him from continuing with his cryptographic consultancy for the government communications headquarters.
But, that just hurts the government's cryptology and code breaking.
Though he did keep his academic job. He was not like he lost all his work, he just couldn't work for the government anymore.
Right.
He was denied entry into the United States after his conviction in 1952, but was free to visit other European countries. Turing was never accused of espionage, but, in common with all who had worked at Bletchley Park, he was prevented by the Official Secrets Act from discussing his war work. On June 8, 1954, Turing's housekeeper found him dead. He had died the previous day. A post-mortem examination established that the cause of death was cyanide poisoning. When his body was discovered, an apple lay half-eaten beside his bed, and although the apple was not tested for cyanide, it was speculated that this was the means by which a failed dose was consumed. An inquest determined that he had committed suicide, and he was cremated at a crematorium on June 12, 1954.
Why didn't they test the apple?
People just kind of want to make it go away.
He was a homosexual. They didn't care.
Who cares? Turing's ashes were scattered at the crematorium just as his father's had been. Andrew Hodges and another biographer, David Levitt, have both suggested that Turing was reenacting a scene from the Walt Disney film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, his favorite fairy tale, both noting that, in Levitt's words, he took an especially keen pleasure in the scene where the Wicked Queen immerses her apple in the poisonous brew. Now, contrarian view here, philosophy professor Jack Copeland has questioned various aspects of the coroner's historical verdict. He suggests an alternative explanation for the cause of Turing's death. This being the accidental inhalation of cyanide fumes from an apparatus for electroplating gold onto spoons, which uses potassium cyanide to dissolve the gold. Turing had an apparatus like this set up in his tiny spare room. Copeland notes that the autopsy findings were more consistent with inhalation than with the ingestion of the poison. Turing also habitually ate an apple before bed, and it was not unusual at all for it to be discarded half-eaten. In addition, Turing had reportedly borne his legal setbacks and hormone treatment, which had been discontinued for a year, with good humor, and had shown no sign of despondency prior to his death, even setting down a list of tasks he intended to complete upon return to his office after the holiday weekend. Turing's own mother believed that the ingestion was accidental, resulting from her son's careless storage of laboratory chemicals, which she says he'd been doing his whole life.
That'd do it, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Biographer Andrew Hodges suggests Turing arranged the delivery of equipment to deliberately allow his mother plausible deniability regarding any suicide claims. So it's a back and forth argument. Some people believe it was suicide, some people believe it was accidental.
And we don't know. We'll never know.
Yeah, so you choose which option you think is...
Right. Turing's the only one who knew.
In 2009...
And he ain't talking. We'd have to dig him up.
And they didn't test the apple.
And they didn't test the apple.
In 2009, 54 years after Turing's death, UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued a public apology to Turing on behalf of the British government. And this was after a lot of pressure by scientists and mathematicians and crypt-analysts. There were petitions going around. And this is what Gordon Brown said. Alan and the many thousands of other gay men who were convicted as he was convicted under homophobic laws were treated terribly. This recognition of Alan's status as one of Britain's most famous victims of homophobia is another step towards equality and long overdue. Acknowledging Britain's debt to Turing for his vital contributions to the war effort, he announced, "On behalf of all the British government and all those who lived freely thanks to Alan's work, I'm very proud to say, we're sorry. You deserve so much better."
Recently, Trudeau did a speech like that.
His conviction was not actually pardoned for another 4 years. 2013, when he was...
That should have been the pardon.
That was an apology. When he received a rare royal pardon from the Queen of England.
Well, it's about time, Liz.
In September 2016, the government announced its intention to expand this retroactive exoneration to other men convicted of similar historical indecency offenses of what was described as an Alan Turing law. The Alan Turing Law is now an informal term for the law in the United Kingdom contained in the Policing and Crime Act 2017, which serves as an amnesty law to retroactively pardon men who were cautioned or convicted under historical legislation that outlawed homosexual acts. And there are many, I didn't write them all down, but many, many tributes to his work, plaques around the country, and just of all the things he did.
Well, look at what he did.
Every computer that we have is...
He's the reason our world is what it is now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He's definitely one of them. I want to talk about someone else, though. One I'd be very surprised if you have heard of.
Okay.
We've talked about one of England's most famous cryptanalysts and the work he did in the war. Now let's talk about a woman from the United States. Elizabeth Smith Friedman.
We went to prom. Well, we went to prom
Makes
together.
sense, yeah.
She was my prom date. I lost my
Did you
virginity.
kiss you?
Never mind.
Now
Is Friedman Lake named after her?
Yeah. Yeah, it's named after us together, she and I.
Friedman
I urged
Lake?
them. That's
You
where
were the lake and she was the Friedman?
Well, we were both the lake.
Oh.
We blended together our bodies, entwined seamlessly,
so a
you
lot
didn't
of
know where mine began.
a lot
and
of
hers
my
ended.
report here comes from a book written by Jason Fagon called "The Woman Who Smashed Codes." A true story of
Not all
love,
she smashed.
spies, and the unlikely heroine who outwitted America's enemies.
Heroin is my favorite drug because it does outwit enemies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as they're the ones using it.
As long as they're the ones. Yeah, I don't use it
Anymore.
anymore.
Elizabeth Smith Friedman
Or
was
any
an
less.
expert cryptanalyst and author and pioneer in U.S. cryptography. She has been called America's first female cryptanalyst. And it's probably not a name familiar to anyone who's listening.
Except me.
And so
Because
when...
we banged.
Okay. When Fagan was asked to introduce, this is from an interview with him,
Yeah.
to introduce us to this remarkable woman and explain what drew you to her, he responded this: "Well, it's an amazing American story. 100 years ago, a woman in her early 20s became one of the greatest codebreakers America had ever seen. She taught herself how to solve secret messages without knowing the key. That's codebreaking. And she started from absolutely nothing. She wasn't a mathematician. She was a poet. But she turned out to be a genius at solving these very difficult puzzles, and her solutions changed the 20th century.
Wow.
She caught gangsters and organized crime kingpins during Prohibition. She hunted Nazi spies during World War II.
Oh, me goddamn. This lady.
She also helped to invent the modern science of secret writing, cryptology, that lies at the base of everything from government institutions like the NSA to the fluctuations of our daily online lives. Not bad for a Quaker girl from a small Indiana town.
Indiana.
Let me stop you right there. I love these stories about seemingly normal people from small towns who do something extraordinary, like become a spy.
She is such a badass.
For the U.S. What years was she active? When did she start, really?
She was born in 1892 in Huntington, Indiana.
Same age as Turing, roughly, then, right?
Approximately, pretty close. I think she's a little older than he was, but I could be wrong about that.
But still, same era.
Yeah, same era.
Really?
Well, I mean, they both fought Nazis. So,
Right, right.
Her father was John Marion Smith, a Quaker dairyman, banker, and politician.
Quaker. Are there a lot of Quakers in Indiana?
No, I mean, this 1892. I don't know how many there are now, but...
I always thought they were only in Pennsylvania. Like,
There's
I
a
thought
large
there was, that was
German
the,
population.
Quakers are all over the place.
Are they really?
Especially.
I've never...
They're not like the Amish. They don't live in their own isolated
Well, no,
communities.
they're just a religious
Well, there's a lot
folk,
of
right? They're
Germanic
not-
history in parts of Indiana as well.
Yeah.
Friedman was the youngest of 9 surviving children because the 10th died in infancy and grew up on a farm. From 1911 to 1913, she attended the University of Worcester in Ohio, but she left when her mother became ill before she could graduate. In 1913, she transferred to Hillsdale College in Michigan since it was closer to home. In 1915, she graduated with a major in English literature. She was a member of Pi Beta Phi, having exhibited her interest in language. She also studied Latin, Greek, and German, and minored in, direct quote, a great many other things. Only
She's a
she
Renaissance woman.
and one other sibling attended college, of the 9.
Huh.
In fall of 1915, so she would have been about 23 here,
Yeah.
Elizabeth became the substitute principal of a public high school in Wabash, Indiana. This position was short-lived, however, and in the spring of 1916, she quit and moved back with her parents. But she didn't stay with them very long. She then decided to go to Chicago and look for a job that was, direct quote, more unusual. And those are her words. And in the city, while she was visiting a rare book library, she happened to cross paths with a Gilded Age tycoon named George Fabian. This dude is fascinatingly insane.
A Gilded Age tycoon.
Yeah. He was a lot like William Randolph Hearst or Andrew Carnegie, one of these incredibly wealthy multimillionaires who made his fortune in textiles.
But was he a prick?
Not exactly.
The other guys were.
Not exactly. Unlike a lot of other rich men of the time, he didn't go to lavish vacations in the French Riviera or collect art. He dreamed of discovering the secrets of nature. Although he was a high school dropout, he saw himself as a great sponsor of science, somebody who used his fortune to bring together some of America's finest scientists and give them carte blanche to discover the secrets of the world.
That's lovely.
Nice. Wow.
Give it some time. He's
okay.
pretty strange.
Okay.
He was very eccentric.
Well, I'm just thinking Hearst was like, he wanted to sit in his ivory tower and
this
suck
is
up all the money
definitely
from
not
everybody.
what Fabian was.
Okay.
Fabian lived in a villa full of furniture that hung from the ceiling on chains. His couch and bed hung on chains. He was extremely suspicious of everyone around him. He kept a hive of honeybees inside his own personal house because he didn't trust them to make honey unless he surveilled them personally.
Man, the rich people are fucking weird. Mackenzie and I watched part of The Aviator this past week.
Yeah.
Rich people are fucking weird.
So
Okay.
So to sit down, all of it, everything. Now he can use his
I don't
furniture,
have a picture, right? It's obviously
but
considered.
it's suspended. It's not so everything's clear underneath.
Yeah.
But you have these chains everywhere holding everything from the ceiling that you've got to kind of scoop your arms around to get in and.
Jesus Christ, man.
Like, what the
Now let's get to
weird.
He's a man of science, right? So
Yeah.
why would he bring in an English teacher?
Right.
I mean, English.
Right.
One of his obsessions was secret writing. He believed that Shakespeare wasn't the author of famous plays like Hamlet or Julius Caesar.
Oh, he's one of these guys.
He
was
thought they were
10
written
monkeys.
by one of Shakespeare's contemporaries, the philosopher Francis Bacon.
Yeah, I've heard this before.
Fabian believed that Bacon had placed secret messages inside the original 1623 editions of the play as a signature of his authorship, and was convinced these secret messages could be discovered, thereby rewriting the history of English literature.
Wow. Did he involve the Rosicrucians and the Templars in these
I don't
thoughts as well?
these conspiracies. But I've heard this before, though, but I thought it was relegated mainly to Shakespeare's sonnets, that he would outsource that to other people. I didn't know it was the actual plays.
Everything, there are people who believe that Bacon wrote all of Shakespeare's stuff.
And this is because of comparing the writings of both people and then deciding that
there's
one
some
was
people
more
who don't
like
think
the
that
other.
William Shakespeare ever really existed as a person.
But he was a
shit.
cabal of people who were writing.
Right. And because, well...
It was a good time for writers, though.
His name is spelled differently on various things, too. It's not always spelled exactly the same.
I'll be damned.
So for Fabian, who wanted to prove this, he hired some of the world's most prominent Bacon and Shakespeare experts.
Bacon.
I'm a bacon expert.
I was going to say, Ron's a bacon expert.
And he brought them
I
to
know all about
Riverbank, which is the name of his villa. That's how Elizebeth Friedman, then at that time Elizabeth Smith, ended up at Riverbank at the age of 23 as a codebreaker.
Was a kid.
Yeah.
She was a child.
She began working at Riverbank in 1916. At Riverbank Laboratories, Friedman founded one of the first facilities in the U.S. to study cryptography. Riverbank gathered historical information on secret writing, and until MI8, the Army's Cipher Bureau, was created during World War I, Riverbank was the only facility in the United States capable of solving enciphered messages.
Well, let me ask you this. Did she and Turing, did their work ever intersect? Did they know one another?
I don't know if they ever met,
Yeah.
but their work definitely intersected. We'll get to that in a moment.
Okay, yeah, I'm just wondering if their work influenced the other,
I would say more likely
symbiotically there.
it came from him to her.
Okay,
But
that's what I'm curious about. Which
But their
one?
styles were very different. So, military cryptography had been de-emphasized after the Civil War because we weren't fighting anyone. During World War I, several U.S. government departments asked Riverbank Labs for help or sent personnel there for training. Among those was Agnes Meyer Driscoll, who came on behalf of the Navy. Among the staff of 15 at Riverbank was the man Elizabeth would marry in May 1917, William F. Friedman.
Yeah, we're still not talking, Friedman and I.
The couple worked together for the next 4 years in one of the only cryptographic facilities in the country. In 1921, the Friedmans left Riverbank and From a story I heard once on a podcast I listened to about Elizabeth, it was essentially an escape because of how crazy Fabian was. Like, they escaped. They just like made a break for it in the night.
Did she ever find any codes in the Shakespeare's writing?
We'll come back to that.
I'm curious about that.
We'll come back to that at the end. They left for Washington, D.C. Elizabeth and William were soon recruited by the U.S. Treasury Department to fight illegal liquor smuggling that had grown because of Prohibition. Rum runners used ships that could outrun the Coast Guard vessels to smuggle rum into the United States. The Coast Guard was unable to stop them because the rum runners got really good at concealing their operations using coded radio messages. Thousands of these messages were piling up in the Coast Guard offices, so they approached Elizebeth Friedman to get help reading them.
Well, makes sense.
Between 1926 and 1930, she solved smuggling messages in hundreds of different code systems. She did it all by hand with pencil and paper before the era of computers.
What?
Shit.
Really?
In June 1928, she was sent to teach C.A. Housel, stationed with the coordinator of the Pacific Coast Details, how to decrypt rum runners' messages. So she's teaching others how to do what she's doing. Under her teaching, Housel was able to decode 3,300 messages within 21 months.
Wow. Jeez.
In October and November 1929, she was then recruited in Houston, Texas, to solve 650 smuggling traffic cases that had been subpoenaed by the United States Attorney. In doing so, she decrypted 24 different coding systems used by the smugglers. So it's not just like one system and she's solving a bunch of messages.
Right.
She's figuring out all of their systems.
Yeah, she's figuring everybody out.
Even though the early codes and ciphers were very basic, their subsequent increase in complexity and resistance to solution was important to the financial success and growth of the rum running operations. The extent of their sophistication seemed to pose little problem for Friedman. She still mounted successful attacks against both simple substitution and transposition ciphers, and the more complex enciphered codes, which eventually came into use. While working for the U.S. Coast Guard, the Bureau of Narcotics, the Bureau of Internal Revenue, the Bureau of Prohibition and Customs, and the Department of Justice, she solved over 12,000 rum runners messages
12,000
in just 3 years.
Wow.
Jeez.
How many a day is she doing?
Yeah, I don't
Right.
wanna do that
She's
math.
working for Ness.
Towards the end of the 1920s, she also began to testify in court against some of the biggest gangsters of the day. These criminal cases required her to explain to juries how she solved these secret messages. So think about this. She's literally explaining how she's solving the messages. So that means the groups that are hearing this can be like, oh, we have to do this differently.
Yeah,
now.
they
and then
know.
she'd solve those too.
Because she told him how to solve
Yeah.
it. That's brilliant.
She would go into court carrying her handbag, wearing a pink dress and hat with flower pins, and would explain to jury exactly how she'd intercepted these radio messages and decode them. And some of these guys were really dangerous. She testified in one case in New Orleans against 3 lieutenants of Al Capone.
Wow.
Her efforts in 1933 alone resulted in convictions against 35 bootlegging ringleaders
Good God.
who were found to have violated the Volstead Act. As a result, she became one of the most famous codebreakers in the world. She was known as the Lady Manhunter, or the Key Woman of the Key Man.
The key woman of the key man.
Key Man
Key
being a
Woman of the
nickname
Key
for the
Man.
Treasury agent, kind of like G-Man for the FBI.
Right.
She was on front pages from coast to coast, and she hated all of it.
Well, yeah. I wouldn't if I were.
Oh, you would love it.
No. If I'm implementing a system, though, to fight organized gangsters at that time, I don't want my face in the paper. I don't want them to know what I look like.
But her,
That I wouldn't love.
Okay.
I would love spitting on them from a bridge.
as
That'd be a hoot. Yeah.
Well, she was just a very modest person and disdained what she later called the hero worship. After Hitler invaded Poland in 1939 and World War II began, the code-breaking team Elizabeth had built within the Coast Guard starting to intercept and analyze messages that looked a lot like the rum-running messages, but were actually being sent by Nazi spies. These spies were spreading into, I don't know if you guys heard of this story, but you know there were Nazi spies in South America?
I wasn't aware of that. I didn't hear about
South
that.
America?
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I
crazy,
didn't
right?
know.
I never knew
What
Nazis were in
business
South
would they have in
America.
South
I'll tell you,
America?
a
That's
report
ridiculous.
on that would be really interesting.
That would be
Oh,
awesome.
someone should do that.
Someone should do an episode on Nazis in South America.
At the time, South America was a neutral continent, and these Nazis were going South America and Mexico and the United States.
Right.
And all of a sudden, Elizabeth's team, which had been focused on smuggling, became a team that hunted Nazi spies.
I'll be damned.
In the process, she met figures from British intelligence. The British sent over a lot of young officers who looked to all the world like they were just British chaps having a good time, but were actually spies. One of these men was Ian Fleming, who would go on to write James Bond.
Look, it all comes together.
It's tied it all together.
It all comes together now.
Another was young Roald Dahl, who at the time was a handsome poet. He also helped write some of the James Bond stories.
I didn't know Dahl helped with that.
Yeah.
Okay, British spy.
Some of the movies, yeah.
Yep.
I didn't know. What a smart
Also
guy.
worked on the notorious Enigma codes. While Alan Turing was organizing large-scale attacks on Enigma codes using algorithms and large electromechanical devices like the bomb.
She's fighting the Riddler.
Yeah,
Is what's
exactly.
happening? Yes.
Elizabeth was more narrowly focused on a couple of the systems being used by Nazi spies. That's how the notorious SS spy Johann Siegfried Becker, nicknamed Sargo, was encrypting reports he sent from South America to Berlin. So she's trying to catch this specific guy.
Right.
The FBI considered Becker, Sargo, the most dangerous Nazi spy in the Western Hemisphere. He directed more than 50 agents from a base in Argentina.
Argentina? Wait, really?
Yeah.
Argentina?
There are no Nazis in Argentina. There have never been Nazis in Argentina. I thought we had disproven that.
Yeah, they were exchanging thousands of sensitive espionage reports with Germany, gathering information on U.S. and British military capabilities, and instigating military coups in South American countries to swing governments towards the Nazis.
Huh. Interesting.
I'm just doing Jeff's report again. Elizabeth's efforts led to the destruction of every Nazi spy network in South America, in particular the one run by Sargo.
Excellent.
Wait a minute. Every one of them that we knew of.
Sure.
It's not fair to say every one of them if we don't know what every one of them are.
Direct quote from the author of the story. By any measure, Elizabeth was a great heroine of the Second World War. But her role was erased by J. Edgar Hoover. The FBI
Motherfucker.
had responsibility for catching Nazi spies in South America, and those were the networks that Elizabeth was tracking. So she was giving messages to the FBI and also providing them with materials so they could solve the messages themselves. Without Elizabeth and her team, the FBI would have been completely lost.
Wow.
But after the networks were destroyed towards the end of 1944, J. Edgar Hoover launched a publicity campaign to take credit for winning this invisible war, claiming that the FBI was solely responsible.
Of course he did.
He
was
produced
kind of
a
prick,
film
wasn't he?
that was shown to U.S. troops called The Battle of the United States, which portrayed the FBI as the main hero and published articles in popular magazines about the FBI's great work. He did not credit Elizabeth or her team.
Shit.
Of course he didn't.
He was really good at, what do you call it? PR. Though
Public
Hoover
relations?
was at that time. G-Man, they were the guys. They were the ones.
He
You know,
had
they
his
were the
own.
badasses.
He had his own agenda for the.
Of course he did.
For the FBI. So why would he want to give credit to someone else?
So is he a good guy or a bad guy, Hoover? Ultimately, in the end, is he a good guy or a bad guy?
It depends on the situation.
I think-
There's a lot of
it's
bad
not
things
that
that he
simple.
did.
I don't think it is
but there's
either.
a lot of good things that he did.
I think he did some shitty things
He
for
actually
the right
professional.
reasons.
Well, he professionalized the FBI.
Yeah.
And the FBI is this great organization. And Hoover, in the early days, was the person who was getting rid of all these cowboys and making it more technocratic, so that it was, people are following a set of rules and procedures. Right. He's the person who sent in the FBI to deal with the Osage murders that were going on at that time.
The ones we had talked about.
That was the
another podcast.
The early beginnings of the FBI. That's what that was.
Yeah.
But he also did a whole lot of really horrible things.
Right.
So, it's more complex. He was, like most human beings, he's neither just good or bad. He's a mixture of the both.
And by discrediting
Thanos.
Elizabeth, he's making it sound like this organization we have works.
Right.
And it's selling this, you can trust your United
Which
States.
is a shitty thing to do to somebody, but it's not for the horrible reason.
Yeah.
I'm guessing she probably didn't mind so much since she didn't like the publicity she was getting in the first place.
Yeah, we'll get
Did
back
you
to
guys
her.
see the J. Edgar movie?
I didn't see it.
No.
Okay. I'm
DiCaprio?
curious about
One
it.
with,
I would watch it if one of you guys
DiCaprio,
said
yeah.
it's pretty good. But
To this day,
okay.
historians wrongly praise Hoover and the FBI for achievements that were actually Elizabeth's.
Yeah.
As a result, Americans have no idea that Elizabeth Friedman, a mother of two, was the great Nazi spy catcher of the war.
Yeah, if we hadn't had a thing, I would have never heard of
Yeah.
it.
Wow.
Elizabeth and William are called the Adam and Eve of the NSA, in the sense that they were present at the birth of U.S. codebreaking at Riverbank in 1916. Everything that happened afterward grew out of that time and that place. Elizabeth also helped to invent the science that undergirds a lot of the NSA's work, but she had no direct role in the NSA's creation. It was her husband, William Friedman, who helped create it. The Army code-breaking unit that William launched in the early 1930s and led throughout all the war decrypted Japanese cipher machines, leading to major U.S. victories. After the war, that unit became absorbed into the agency that we now know as the NSA.
Wow.
Neat.
William was an NSA official for a number of years until he began to believe that the NSA was collecting too much information and keeping too much of it classified. He became suspicious about the direction of an institution that, in many ways, he helped create, and eventually came to believe that the NSA's practices were a threat to democracy itself.
Well, you walk a thin line with these organizations.
In private
Too
letters,
far.
he made criticisms of the NSA that are reminiscent of Edward Snowden's criticism decades later.
Yeah. Well, these are legitimate criticisms, I feel.
Yep.
Yeah. After retirement from government service, Friedman and her husband, who had long been Shakespeare enthusiasts, collaborated on a manuscript called The Cryptologist Looks at Shakespeare, eventually published as The Shakespearean Ciphers Examined. It won awards from the Folger Shakespeare Library and the American Shakespeare Theatre and Academy. In this book, Friedman dismissed those such as Elizabeth Wells Gallup and Ignatius Donnelly, Francis Bacon experts, who believed he had written much of Shakespeare's work. Gallup actually worked at Riverbank with her.
Okay.
And they dismissed these claims with such technical proficiency and finesse that the book won far more acclaim than any of the others that addressed the same topic.
So are they saying Shakespeare did write this stuff?
Or at least that there's nothing in these books that would suggest he did.
So their analysis says
There's no reason to think
what Francis
Bacon
Bacon did not write this stuff. Okay. It's
fake-
disappointing to
No
think
wonder they
that
had to
somebody
escape.
did.
Yeah.
I hate thinking that Shakespeare was an amalgamation of people
He
that
wasn't.
wrote these works. I hate that. I want Shakespeare to be real.
Yeah.
For as horrible as he was.
So Fagin, the
He was
author...
a horrible human being.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I didn't go to
I don't know.
college.
He was smelly.
Okay.
They were
Fagin
all
wrote-
smelly in 1600.
You know.
Fagin, the author, wrote that the world forgot about Elizabeth, but remembered her husband William. When he was asked why that was, Fagin responded, "Sexism?"
That's a fine answer.
Part of the reason she was forgotten after the war is because of secrecy. Her records were classified, stamped top secret ultra, and carried off to what she called government tombs. Thousands of pages of her decryptions and proof of everything she had done in the war were placed under lock and key in the National Archives until as late as the year 2000.
I picture the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Exactly.
Every
Yeah.
time something like that happens.
Along with so many other American women who wrote codes during the war, she was told that if she ever spoke about it, even to her grandchildren, she would be prosecuted.
Yeah.
So she didn't.
No, they take it
And as a
seriously.
result, for many years, nobody knew what she had done in the war.
So how did her story get out?
But then, later in her life, after having years to think and look back, after reading lots of war memoirs written by men, in some cases men she had known personally, she started to gather her memories and write some of them down. She was irritated at some of the distortions of history that she read in the other books. And I think she'd gotten enough distance from her own work, she was finally able to feel some pride in it.
Yeah.
And recognize that she had done important things. Her son and daughter also urged her to write memoirs. And she tried a few times, but she never got very far. There was always some secret episode she didn't feel free to reveal, and she had to stop. Or something else in her life had intervened.
Sure.
When her husband's health deteriorated in the 50s and 60s, Elizabeth had to spend increasing amounts of time caring for him and curating his own papers. Thankfully, she preserved enough of her letters and other documents that it's possible today to put the pieces of her story together. I actually read a little bit about her political views that I thought was pretty interesting.
No.
She had a lot of views we'd consider progressive today. She admired FDR. She didn't like McCarthy. She believed in peace and international cooperation. She led a League of Women Voters chapter that met at her house.
Oh,
Nice. Yeah.
She was deeply influenced by growing up in a family of Quakers. She never felt very connected to her parents or most of her siblings, but she did absorb the Quaker belief in peace, and it stayed with her whole life.
That's nice.
There's a story about how, during the 30s, when she was getting on the witness stand at these dramatic trials and being threatened and testifying against killers, the government assigned 2 Secret Servicemen to guard her 24/7. These men were to stay at her house in Washington, and they became like part of the family for a while, and Elizabeth would cook dinner for them. But Elizabeth refused to let the agents bring their guns into the house.
Wow.
The story about the guns and the agents has been passed down over years to her grandkids, and the explanations that her grandchildren always heard was, Granny was a Quaker. Elizabeth Friedman died on October 31st, 1980.
She had a good run
She died
on Halloween.
too,
Yeah.
in the Abbott Manor Nursing Home in Plainfield, New Jersey at the age of 88. She is buried with her husband at Arlington National Cemetery.
so has the National Archives released her
As of
documented?
2000, I think just about everything she's worked on has been released. I didn't really look into a lot of the primary sources. I went mostly from her biography.
Well, it's such dated information now. There's no reason to keep it hidden.
I
Yeah,
just
because now
love-
we have computer codes.
I love
Right,
comparing
right.
Turing and Friedman.
Yeah.
He is a mathematician developing computation devices that can crack these codes. She's got a pencil and paper and just solving these.
Right.
Yeah.
She knows
messages.
words.
Yeah.
She knows language.
She was a poet. He was a mathematician. But both of them fought Nazis in World War II
Yeah.
and did great work in helping us defeat the Hitler and the tide of darkness that was marching across the
Very
world.
cool. Very cool. We need more Codebreakers now.
Yeah.
We need them to come back.
And incidentally, they both had Roy Harley as a lover.
Absolutely.
Roy Harley.
Yeah.
Roy motherfucking Harley.
Roy motherfucking Harley, lover of the stars.
Yeah. So that's my report on the Codebreakers of World War
Wow,
II.
well done.
On Turing
Yeah,
and Elizabeth
good
Friedman.
stuff.
I like how
Good
you
stuff.
tied it into so many of our
Every
other
other topic.
episodes.
Right, everything came full circle here.
Yeah.
I
Even Halloween.
I love it. The Imitation Game. That was one of them that I watched during the horrible flu
Oh,
Company?
outbreak during
When you had
Company.
Captain Trips.
Yeah, when I actually stayed awake long enough to watch most of it. I started drifting in and out at some points, but during that flu,
Right.
you were never conscious fully at any point for the entire week. But I remember stopping on that and not giving a shit enough about what was on TV. I was just popping it in
Yeah.
for noise while I slept. And I ended up getting so hooked on that movie that I couldn't
Stayed
stop
awake.
watching it. Yeah.
I've been looking for the original version of The Haunting of Hill House, and
It's hard.
I can only find the Liam Neeson one, which he said is crap.
it's
So I don't want to.
god-awful.
I don't want to watch that one. I want to watch the original one.
The remake is, god damn it. It's kind of fun. It's interesting. It's pretty on the eyes. The music's great. I really want to urge you to watch it, and I can't, in good conscience, urge you to watch. God damn it! And the original is so hard to find. It's not on any of the streaming services that I have access to. It's
Actually,
hard
a
to
lot
find.
of older movies are getting harder and harder to find because most
Yeah.
people. I don't know if it's that. Well, there's so much new stuff coming out that they're trying to sell the new stuff, but you'd think that there'd be access to the older stuff.
You would think. Let me look through my stuff, my DVDs. They're spread out everywhere among the house. I swear I thought I'd bought it, but I can't find it. The last time I looked. So let me look again. I know I've owned it at one point. I just don't. I either don't know where it is, or I loaned it out and it hadn't come back. One of those things. But if you get your hands on a copy of The Haunting, keep a hold of it because it is hard to find.
We'd love to hear back from you, sweet deckheads, about your thoughts on code breaking.
Yeah.
We love you guys so much.
Absolutely.
Code breaking,
Code breaking.
fighting the
Your thoughts on-
Boogeyman.
Let's say our favorite section today was your favorite. Tell us about your favorite conference Jeff has spoken at in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, that'd be great. I want to hear your views on it.
We have one more weekend of Mamma Mia.
Yep.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday,
You should
Sunday this
definitely
week.
go and
Check
see
out.
it.
It's
A lot of fun. Hell of a lot of fun. Jeff and I were both there last
I
night.
have a mustache.
Yeah, there's a lot of sequins, a lot of
There
a lot
are
of disco
so
dancing.
many sequences
I
on
love
that
that
stage.
giant disco ball that's projected on
Yeah.
that round screen. It looks totally round like a giant disco
Yeah.
ball when you first.
You know what I kept
Projected.
thinking the whole time? That it looked
Confetti
like the
cannons.
Arkanoid. No,
Yeah.
the Arkanoid
Okay.
video game where the ball bounces on the paddles
Yeah.
and takes out the bricks above it. That,
Brick,
it made
brick,
me
brick.
think of that, yeah. Yeah, and the cannons,
Yeah,
which I
the
thought...
confetti
cannons.
I was like, they stole that from Jeff. Jeff, actually, there were a few things in that show where I was like, they stole that
The
from
flippers.
us.
The flippers.
Yeah.
they-
I was like, they
Heroic.
stole that from me and Jeff. God damn it. It just means Jeff and I are brilliant. And you, by extension,
Well, I mean,
are as
it's
well.
not a big deal. But thank you.
You know, of course. Sure. We love you very much.
All right, and with that, sweet deckheads, until next time, we say stay wild.
Stay wild.
and bite the edge.